Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Reunions 2024. I see many familiar faces in the crowd this morning, which is wonderful. But for those who I have not yet had the pleasure of meeting, my name is Lindsay Sedonis, and I'm the Director of Development and Alumni Relations here at Northeastern Law. Thank you to everyone for traveling from near and far to be with us this morning to reconnect with your classmates and your law school. We are thrilled to welcome you back to campus for the celebrations this weekend. Personally, my favorite part about kicking us off this weekend is I get to be the first to congratulate members of the class of 1974 for celebrating their milestone 50th reunion. Last night, we took you back to your days as a student with our fabulous faculty at Back to Class Night. And today, we will explore the accomplishments of our graduates. As 7 of them will talk about their careers with our faculty and staff. But before we get started, I'd like to bring up Dean James Hackney to share a few exciting updates about the law school. For those of you who are celebrating your 30th reunion or sooner, you probably know the dean as a beloved torts professor. He joined us in 1991 as an assistant professor and has won the Teacher of the Year award 5 times, which is wonderful. He has held several leadership positions here at the law school and university-wide, and currently he is serving in his 2nd year of his 2nd 5-year term as dean. And when Dean Hackney isn't creating new interdisciplinary or mission-driven programs, launching new centers of excellence, or creating accessible pathways to law school for students from diverse backgrounds or with financial need, he's busy traveling the country with our team to personally connect with our graduate community, which I know is one of his favorite parts about being dean. Dean Hackney, would you come up?
Reminds me of first year of tort. I'm always amused when former students see how intimidating I was as a torts professor. It doesn't work that way when you're dean. I'll just frame it that way. But first of all, welcome to your reunion, Reunions 2024, right? It's wonderful to be here. I first want to thank our wonderful advancement team, Lindsay Sedonis, Neo Marquis, Ayana Williams, and Julianne Griffin for bringing us all here together at this wonderful occasion. So I'm told that you are 220 strong. I'm sure people will fill in. A bit of an early morning. Come from 20 states and the U.S. Virgin Islands. I met one of your colleagues from the Virgin Islands last night. So very impressive. She's actually close with David Hall, who I'm sure many of you know, a beloved dean of the law school. And actually, the first 2 people that I met from the law school were David Hall and Wendy Parmet when I was beginning to interview to become a professor here. So, also, to echo Lindsay, want to give a special shout out to the class of 1974, 50th reunion. And you know, they like to party. You know, we were hanging out last night and they closed the place out. It was like around 9 o'clock and it's still going on. I got to get home. Got to get some rest. But you know, that class of 1974, so very esteemed and accomplished group, and we're having a really terrific time talking about the law school as it was then and as it is now. As Lindsay said, one of my favorite things to do as dean is to meet with you. It really energizes me and serves as an inspiration with respect to what I do as dean, what we do as a faculty and staff in terms of educating our students, sustaining them through their educational career, and then to see the wonderful things that folks are doing and the impact that you are having in the world. It really makes what we do as educators so fulfilling. So this is, for me, a time that's actually very energizing and inspirational. Now, one of the things that graduates frequently ask me is, well, is the school the same? No, obviously not. This used to be a basketball court. I'm sure many of you remember that. People retire. Last year, Brooke Baker retired. I'm thinking about Brooke because I think he's like legendary for playing basketball, if not fairly all the time. I understand he would foul people quite aggressively. But anyway, there are changes in terms of the building, the structure, et cetera. But the heart of the school remains the same. The focus on public interest, the focus on experiential learning. And I'm going to talk a bit more about our students in a bit. What makes us work as an institution is the people, the students, our teachers, the staff, but also you and what you give back to us as a community. And that's not only the philanthropic dollars, but it's also your time, energy, and wisdom. So as you are our co-op employers, our employers of our graduates, mentors, advisors, et cetera, those are ways of giving back that are deeply appreciated by me and the entire community. And that support for our students is critical. The cost of legal education is steep. It's not quite what it was in the 1970s. So the scholarshiping that we can do, given philanthropy, is critical with respect to making legal education more affordable, and in particular, affordable for students who want to go into the public interest sector. So, thank you for that. I want to give a special thanks to our class reunion committees as well. Neil is so hip. She does this now. Anyway, you get that from your kid, right? Your kids must not do that. So the reunion committees, and also to everyone who has contributed to the reunion in honor of your reunion. Okay, so at the end of August, we welcomed 265 freshly minted 1L students to the Northeastern Law School. And they are quite well accomplished. They are actually the most highly accomplished academically class in the history of a law school. Now, your class is the best class. They just have the highest LSATs and GPAs, okay? So they have a median LSAT of 163, median GPA of 3.73. So I always say I can never get into either my college or law school. They're a diverse class, 70% women, 30% identify as LGBTQ plus, and 30% students of color, and 14% identify first generation students as well. And when I say that number, 265, that's a combination of two classes of JD students. The in-person JD students who come to us, to Boston, to take up their JD degree, but also a new program that we initiated 3 years ago, the Flex JD, which is an online JD degree that students take, and they come to campus about 2 times a year in 3-day chunks. So the education is 95% online, and that's very exciting for me as an educator and as the leader of the school, because it gives us an opportunity to have the benefits of a Northeastern degree spread more broadly. I teach in the program. I teach torts. It's not quite the same as being here with me. Probably not as intimidating either. But I think it's wonderful. And what's really great about that program is that the students are more mature. We have to say that instead of older. The students are more mature. They have full lives, working full-time, families, et cetera, and a lot more or a higher percentage of first-generation students as well. So it's a very exciting program. Now, one of the things that I do, I'm 2 minutes over.
You're okay. You're okay.
I'm on a strict time limit of 9:15, so I'm going to go 3 more minutes. So, what I want to emphasize is that the students in that program and throughout are still committed or are committed to the twin prongs of our mission: public interest and experiential education. When I asked them, well, why did you choose Northeastern when you could have chosen any program? Those are the 2 things that they emphasize. We see this on what our students are doing upon graduation. So this past year, we had 1 Skadden Fellow, several Equal Justice Works Fellows, but also we're doing very well in the summer associate programs as well. This past summer, we had 61 students placed in summer associate positions, and I'm proud to say that 50% of those students identify as students of color. So I think it's a tremendous achievement. We continue to hold our reputation in public interest. Pre-Law magazine ranks us #1 in public interest law. We're #7 in health law by U.S. News and World Report. I love that. And we're also recognized in human rights, health law, intellectual property, and racial justice. So to sum up, I am, 4 minutes.
Go to 9:20.
What?
Go to 9:20.
Oh my goodness, you're so generous, Mia. To sum up, the state of your school, which I always like to refer to as small but mighty, is wonderful. And it's wonderful due in large part to you for all that you do for our community, for our students, and also for me. It's deeply appreciated. And we're going to hear quite a bit about all that you do through conversations with. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Miel to introduce conversations with Miel.
Thanks everyone again for being here. I'm Miel Marquis, the Director of Alumni Engagement. We have 7 wonderful conversations for you this morning. We thank our 7 illustrious grads and our 7 members of the faculty and staff for joining us this morning. First up, we have Susan Merowitz, class of 1974, that 50th that we keep hearing about. She was a senior attorney with the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. She's now retired, and she's in conversation with Jennifer Hewer, our Assistant Dean for all the Centers of Excellence, Programs and Institutes, which is a mouthful. And Jennifer was previously the Executive Director for the CHIPL, which is the Center for Health Policy and Law. Jennifer, I turn it over to you.
Wonderful, thank you. Good morning, everyone. Really excited to be here and conversing with my new friend, Susan. Just give me 1 second. All right, I've got my list of questions. Are you ready? I'm ready. All right, I'm excited. I've had a wonderful time getting to know you, and I'm super thrilled to be able to have this conversation and explore a little bit more about, why you're part of what makes Northeastern so amazing. Okay, so let's start there. Let's start with, especially because this is the big 50th, what was your favorite memory of Northeastern Law?
So, can you hear me?
Yes.
I must say that that question stopped me for a while. I regarded going to law school as a very serious business. It's not the most fun experience I ever had. So when I got out of college, my father didn't want me to be a lawyer, didn't want me to, pass a bar in one state and marry somebody in another state. And so I got a degree in teaching from Penn, and I taught for 6 years before I came to law school. So when I used to teach, the first thing I did was to find out something about the people I'm talking to. So I just want to see how many people are here from which classes. So, Neil, if you would run me the numbers for, I want you to raise your hands.
74.
Okay, so the two people I met at the doorway were from 74, thank God, and I didn't recognize them. They recognized me. So if any of you know me, please come tell me who you are. All right.
79.
Thin ranks, guys. Okay.
84.
Oh.
All right.
89.
Nice.
94.
You guys don't look like babies. I thought you looked really, really young.
99. Oh, 4. Oh, 4. Hey!
Oh, wow.
Okay.
Hey, good person. All right.
14. And 19.
Thank you for coming. All right, so quick answer. My favorite memory of law school was the summer of the Watergate hearings. And I believe Arthur Johnson, who is no longer with us, used to bring his portable television to the lounge. And we would eat lunch and watch the Watergate hearings. And to me, it was great because Northeastern students weren't so wound up with their studies, but that they were paying attention to what was going on in the rest of the world. Okay, I have one other slightly humorous story that I'd like to share. I graduated from college in '65. So, the 60s are famous for turmoil. I got my teaching degree, and, there were things different. So, I taught in Wellesley High School for 2 years. And when the kids would come in, I moved the seats so that they would be in a square and they would face each other. People didn't do that much before that time, okay? So that, I'm a big educational expert, right? So I get to law school, and Dean O'Toole wants us to sign a seating chart. Are you kidding? I taught 125 people, and he can't remember my name? So I wouldn't sign. And I was told later that he regarded me as a troublemaker. And I think of myself as this, very quiet, not, not anybody who's going to change the world that much. And that sort of leads me to just say that I am so in awe of the people that I read about in our alumni journal. I am so impressed and so proud of what people who go to this school have accomplished. I'm just very, very proud. Okay. Now, about Arthur Johnson and paying attention to the rest of the world. I couldn't believe I picked up the Washington Post. This is Monday, October 14th. The headline, this was on the first page, so it was below the fold. Okay.
Gotta read it, the headline.
Okay, study of racism, health link threatened. Okay, and then here's all this. Notice the pink underlining. Backlash threatens study of links between racism and health. So at HHS, you know, I stopped working in 2010, but years before that, the agencies that I advised, you know, were funding studies of bias in medical care. And I'll talk a little bit more about my interest in the Health Law Center here, which partially led my confreres to ask me to speak. But anyway, what this talks about is the effort to shut down DEI and to stop funding anything that links racism to healthcare. I don't know where these people come from, but apparently it's our country. And I thought it was worth mentioning that this is going on still. Hard to believe. Okay, second question.
What was your favorite class at Northeastern while you were here, and why?
So, hands down, it was Judy Brown. She was so exciting. She was specializing at that point in terms of housing issues. And I went down to my basement where I still have an awful lot of stuff because I'm a very sentimental person. And I pulled out my notebook, my loose leaf from her class, and there was a newspaper article from the Boston Globe about snob zoning in Concord. Apparently, there were some people in Concord who wanted to take a very historic piece of land where there was probably some revolutionary activity and devote it to people who couldn't otherwise afford to live in this very white, very well-heeled community. Again, we're talking, so I graduated in 74, but this would have been, you know, like 72. So it was just exciting to be in class and having, you know, she would give us materials, case laws that were printed out that she would have a hold of but hadn't necessarily been reported or printed yet. It was, you know, you had the feeling that you were studying the real world. And you had the feeling that you were studying with an expert and somebody who was very excited. And I will say that looking back, you know, maybe people didn't express their excitement as well as she did, but really looking back at the teachers we had, the professors we had, you know, in reflecting on speaking, you know, I realized that there was this fundamental decency and honesty and commitment in all of them. My favorite class.
I love that. And that links to the next question beautifully, which is, as you know, we pride ourselves on our experiential education right here at Northeastern. And we really think it's what sets us apart, right, is being able to take things within the classroom and apply it to the real life and give some of those examples. So how did the experience here prepare you and even propel you in your career?
So, this question was easy. There was no question that after being out of school for 6 years, the idea of coming back to school and sitting where you're sitting now was not too appealing. So the idea that I would get out of here twice, four times, that was really cool. The other thing, when I interviewed at BU Law School, they told me, now remember I would have been coming into school in 1971. So the 60s were just winding down. They told me with, pride, they were going to accept 10% women in the entering class. Okay, whoa, okay. So yeah, I guess we had 51%, as I understand it, when we started. So that had a lot of appeal, a lot of appeal. And I have to say that personally, because I went straight from here in '74 to the federal government, I never really appreciated the paucity of women, that I saw in the movie about Ruth Bader Ginsburg, right? Because there were women in the federal establishment. I didn't feel like such a minority at that time. Okay, now as an educator, with my master's degree in teaching, I really was committed to experiential learning. My kids still don't get it. I can't do anything technological without struggle. So, my kids have no patience. Unfortunately, I don't have any daughters. So I've got all these sons. Don't, just give me your phone. I'll do it for you. So, my first co-op, and I can't remember what led me to this, but my first co-op was on Beacon Hill. And I worked for a rep from Amherst, the town of Amherst, who had been a chemistry professor. And that really set my direction. I mean, look where I went, right? So when I worked for him my first semester, and then when it was time to get a permanent job, I told him I was interested in going to Washington, and he set me up with somebody who was a staffer to Kennedy. And that guy said, I went down to Washington, I met with him. He said, don't come to the Hill, the other Hill, right away, because you get branded with a party, and then you're stuck with that party, and you want to make sure you've chosen what you want. So go to an agency, you'll learn a lot. 36 years later, I retired, right? I never made it back to the Hill, but it was wonderful. And really that first co-op grabbed my interest. What was his name? Oh, goodness, it'll come to me. There are a lot of spaces when you're 80. There are a lot of spaces. Sometimes they close down. Like in the next 20 minutes, I may come up with the guy's name. So, what I want to tell you. Oh, this is another thing. When I interrupt myself, forget it. Sorry? Yeah. Maybe it'll come to me. Anyway, so I'll tell you. I went to work for 2 large firms and 1 small firm. So 4 times I went out, and I was sorry to hear that, it is now trimester and you only get to go out 3 times. Because maybe it would have been okay in my case if I only went to 1 large firm and 1 small firm, but it was very clear to me by those experiences that I liked working in a small firm, not in a large firm particularly. I was telling my kid this morning about it, and he said, so then you went to the federal government where they hardly had any. Anyway, so I clerked in the fall semester of my 3rd year. I went to work for something Flam and Mason Pavin and Flam. Anyway, they were union lawyers, and they would get up at 6 o'clock in the morning to go on the what do you call the lines outside the factories when you're on strike? Picket lines. Then they'd come into work. Then they'd go to an evening meeting, with cigar smokers at the union, right? And I'm thinking, 6 a.m. to 10 p.m., and I'm planning to do a family someday. Not going to go into labor law, but it was very interesting, and I liked it. So I did a semester at Ropes and Gray, which is a big, distinguished firm, and I will tell you that so I worked in trusts and estates. And there was a woman who had graduated from Northeastern Law School very, very early on, and the only job she could get was as a secretary at Ropes and Gray. And she rose to become the head of trusts and estate. So there was always a slot for Northeastern. I don't know, anybody else work at Ropes and Gray for a semester? You're right. And I was just very impressed with the care, the individual care and concern that the lawyers at Ropes and Gray had for their clients. It was just, I just didn't expect it. Okay. And then I worked for a real estate firm and, my Judy Brown interest. Okay. So it was great. And it clearly, it reinforced my interests. It pointed me in a direction. And I just am a big fan of what Northeastern does.
I love that. All right, so this is our last question.
Because I run out of time.
No, we love hearing you. I mean, that's why we're here, right? We're here to learn and to talk with one another. So you had mentioned, right, some of the support that you have offered to Northeastern and specifically through the Center for Health Policy and Law, which I just remain indebted for. It's just been so amazing to support our work and our students, faculty and staff and the work that they do. And I know in learning a little bit about kind of why you did that is definitely connected with your life's mission, right? Or what you're trying to achieve, what impact you're trying to have. But I'd love to hear from you right now, kind of what is your life's mission? What is the impact that you're trying to have in the world?
So there's a concept in Judaism that some of you have heard of called tikkun olam, to make the world a better place while you're here. And I guess that's a simple way of stating what moves me. I had given a donation to my college, which I spent 2 years at Brandeis. I graduated from Brandeis. I felt I certainly should do the same thing for my law school. So I came with my little bundle. Oh, and I guess I have to tell you that when Lindsay suggested that I be the speaker for 74, I said, well, what about Candy? Candy clerked at the Supreme Court. What about, now you're going to have to help me here. The guy who was Attorney General in Maine. Drew. Yeah, what about Drew? What do you want with me, right? But I gave some money. So I was a federal employee. By the way, I was very impressed. When I came back for like the 10th or the 20th, I didn't come to that many reunions, but the big marker times. There was nobody in our class who was corporate law. Nobody. So anyway, I had some money, but we're not talking the kind of money where you put down money and there's so much money there that the interest will go on forever. So my money is just getting spent as fast as I give it. And also, I guess I'd like to mention my dad. My father was a first-generation American. His oldest sister was born on the way here, running away from pogroms in southern Russia. She was born in Holland. Now, I don't know how you get from someplace near Odessa to Holland and then here. That's the way they went. Anyway, he loved this country. He loved being a lawyer. And so I gave the money in his honor. And unfortunately, because my pot wasn't big enough to support endlessly, the money is being spent as we speak. Now this is another little interesting nugget. I heard about Wendy Parmet and her interest in health law from my husband's aunt, who's now going to be, 93, 94, whatever. She said, did you ever hear of Wendy Parmet? No. Why don't you look her up? So, here was somebody who was really doing something in the health field, and I had spent my career in the health field. And I thought, what a nice fit, right? And then Lindsay set up a phone call so that I could hear more about it. And, the more I heard, the more I liked. So what did she want? She was running this program for judges to sensitize judges to how people's lack of access to health care affected who they become and how they acted and why they were before the courts. And I thought, great. So Johnson and Johnson has given their second $1 million to her program. What am I doing? I'm supporting a co-op student every semester who helps. It's a perfect fit, right? Yeah. Well, no, there's the last line. The last line, you'll like this one. Just relax. The last line is that Lindsay thought I was the perfect person to speak because she had told somebody about what I did and somebody else decided to do it too. Okay? Got it?
Thank you, Susan and Jennifer. That was a terrific first conversation. Lovely to hear from both of you. Next up, we have Shaz Das, class of 1994, with Matthew's Distinguished Professor of Law, Michael Meltzner, and Shaz TA'd for Mike. So we can't wait to hear this conversation.
If you can't hear us, shout. Let us know, okay? You've had an incredible career, and in a while, I'm going to put you on the spot and try and get out of the way so you can describe it. But to begin, a couple of observations. First of all, I feel partially responsible because you were my TA working on capital punishment cases. And plainly, you understood that that was a disheartening, depressing, and no way to go. And so you decided to have a different career. So you can thank me later. I came here in 1979 from Columbia Law School, and one of the things I noticed was, as was said before, nobody was interested in corporate law or finance or business. Northeastern's reputation was in a different direction. So my first question to you is, how come? Did the program help you decide the kind of career you were going to have?
Thank you, Michael. First, it's a pleasure to be here. As to why I'm the representative of the class of '94, I also am a little surprised. One of my classmates is Mo Cowan, former senator. I can't believe that. In any event, Michael's very gracious here. I was a legal researcher for him, and he's correct that I've mainly focused on death penalty, habeas corpus cases, which I found exceptionally fascinating, and I think he's giving short shrift to the work I was doing for him because on a more larger scale, really focused just on constitutional issues. So that was I think very very beneficial to me, and I'm glad I was never a client of Michael, and of course if my daughter's boyfriend doesn't propose in the next few months, I may be a client. Anyway, to your question about back in '94 when I graduated, there was, I will say, a paucity of corporate or business oriented courses. My understanding is that has evolved or changed over time. So, Northeastern adapts, and as much as it is the foremost public interest law school in the nation with, specialties in a number of areas, as was highlighted by Dean Hackney, specifically in healthcare. The curriculum is also, I think, evolved, but it had to. I think, and you asked whether my co-op experiences so it influenced my decisions, during the course of my career. Maybe they influenced what I didn't want to do, right? More so than the areas I wanted to follow, because in summary, I worked at the D.C. Superior Court. I worked for a union side labor law firm, and then twice for a government agency, the Pension Benefit Guaranty Corporation, which is in charge of administering defined benefit pension plans, which are really now and it's sort of a relic, historic relic. Now we just have really most companies just offer 401k plans. So I did ERISA and bankruptcy law for 4 years coming out of law school, but I co-opted them twice. And maybe this is a tale more about taking risks, because unfortunately, I co-opted for them in the winter, and then also subsequently in the summer. I had only intended to co-op there once, but I got a call from Jan Hawkins. We'll never forget her name. Nice lady, but she asked me if I had any inkling of working there post law school. I said, yeah. And she was like, well, you have to work here in the summer. I said, well, I already worked there in the winter. Maybe I did a really crappy job there in my winter co-op, such they weren't going to hire me. But anyway, I had already had an offer from Reebok to work there. So, there's a, yeah, the sneaker company. So yeah, if I had taken that job, who knows? I would have been, maybe today I'd be a sports agent. I never know.
Kind of interesting. They don't know that you have a rich tennis background.
Yes. Yeah, I guess we'll get to,
They
yes.
don't know that your father was a referee at the French Open, that he was related to Arthur Ashe's development through his own father. So Reebok, I mean, really, the free sneakers.
Yeah. Yeah, but unfortunately, that was the path not taken. Um, so I, ended up working for this government agency again, which I co-opted twice. Yeah.
I know it's a little hokey, but would you just list the government jobs you had?
Yeah. So
Because it's an amazing collection.
yeah. So in a nutshell, 30 years of practice, 20 years in the government or quasi-government, year in house, and now 9 years in private practice or big law. Of the government agencies that I work for, that includes, I've already mentioned the PBGC, but the SEC, where I was there for 7 years in various capacities. Also the Federal Reserve, the U.S. Treasury Department, and it's the audit regulator for the United States. It was created out of an act called Sarbanes-Oxley Act, the Public Company Accounting Oversight Board. I was their chief negotiator with the Chinese regulators for almost 6 years on this matter called cross-border audit oversight. So what that really means is that all U.S. listed companies, even foreign-based companies, um, have to be audited on an annual basis. And uh, after the Enron, WorldCom, Tyco scandals, which led to the enactment of the Sarbanes-Oxley Act and created the Public Company Accounting Oversight Board, as part of the PCAOB's remit, PCAOB inspectors would examine the books and records of audit firms that issue audit opinions of all companies listed on U.S. exchanges. And that means companies from all over the world. Well, there's one country that was rather recalcitrant and would not agree to such inspections, and that was China, maybe not surprisingly. My first trip to China was in 2011, and it was a very eye-opening experience, but it was also my first negotiations with the China Securities Regulatory Commission and Ministry of Finance, it was almost like I guess a Khrushchev-like moment when a high-level representative from the Ministry of Finance, you know, stood up. He didn't take his shoe off, but he did, you know, proclaim in a very loud manner that the PCAOB will never, ever examine Chinese audit firms, and that's effectively means Chinese companies listed in
So hold on a minute. How many people here have been solicited to take a bribe? Anybody? Tell us about negotiating in China and whether something like that may have.
Yeah. I have engaged in bribes with my family, and I actually do that on a regular basis. I don't think I violate any laws in the process. But when we were getting to, I guess, crunch time, and it was at a point where we were close to a deal whereby our inspectors would have access to audit firm personnel. And actually, I should just clarify, when I'm talking about, you know, I mean, PCB is all, it's you know, it's an acronym, but they're often referred to as peekaboo, right? And they're the auditors of the auditors, right? Um, so when I'm talking about Chinese audit firms, I'm not talking about some, you know, obscure, you know, firm that no one's heard of. I'm talking about the affiliates of the Big Four, right? I mean, these are, you know, massive, you know, enterprises, but the Big Four sort of audit firms, that is, they get to have it both ways. On the one hand, they argue, you know, like banks, that they exercise this enterprise-wide management, but on the other hand, the legal construct is that they're separate and legally distinct from these audit firms that have their brand name. But in any event, we were getting close, but we were debating about which audit papers we get access to, which Chinese-based issuers listed on the NYC or NASDAQ. And what they effectively wanted us to give us, you know, access to were, and I probably even use this term in negotiations, were tantamount to fish markets, meaning like it had no material impact on U.S. investors, right? And we wanted to look at the big Chinese companies that were being audited, right? And you know, the Baidus and the Alibabas of the world, right? And that was something that they just weren't willing to accede to at the time. And so, in order to, I don't know, placate me, because you know I had thought we had a deal, they offered me a pretty sizable sum of money. No, it was a side conversation. Side conversation. I didn't, you know, I obviously did not hesitate. I rejected it outright. If I didn't, I would have a house in the Hamptons right now.
Yen or dollar?
Sorry?
Yen or dollar?
Oh wait, no, well, or won. It was in won, but translated in dollars, it was still a very, you know, significant sum of money.
Put their arm around you?
You know what? I don't know if there was any touching.
I want them to know.
You know, he wasn't so subtle. He said we can make this worth your time. But okay, what you don't know, Michael, I mean, you know that I've been the subject or recipient of a bribe here, but this individual that offered the bribe, so he was the director of the International Affairs Department at the Chinese Securities Regulator. So he left that. He had a meteoric rise. He left that job, then became, then took a senior position at the Ministry of Commerce in China, then became a governor of a very prominent state in China. A few years ago, it came out that he was engaging in embezzlement part and taking bribes himself. Yes, yes, yeah.
Get an advanced degree.
Yeah, so uh, the anti-corruption czar in China, a guy named Wang Qishan, and President Xi actually chose him because this gentleman had no kids. So I mean, I know, but everyone knows what the one-child policy, but he didn't even do that. Okay. So, but in any event, he got sentenced first to death. So maybe our experience together, but yeah, I could have advised him. Although the laws in China are a little different than in the U.S. And then he got I guess what we'll call it a bit of a reprieve. So they gave him sort of 2 years if he had good behavior. I don't know what that means, but that it'd just be life imprisonment. So he's sitting in jail for the rest of his life. And he was the interlocutor for a number of years on the other side.
So the last inside baseball question on this.
Yeah.
Do you report this to someone in the DOJ or?
I did report it when I returned back to the PCOB.
And what was
And
the response?
their response was a good thing you rejected it. Given that, I mean, certainly there could have been, we could have reported DOJ. We did not. We did not. I think we just, when he was subsequently replaced soon thereafter by another gentleman who's now the head of the Sovereign Wealth Fund for China, for the U.S. I should say, so that was sort of like that was a 6-year frolic and detour in my career. So I am currently an international trade lawyer at King and Spalding. I do want to get to that, what I do now. And
Tell us about your transition.
yeah, so I really focus on U.S. economic trade sanctions, which I'm going to say is important. There are people that refer to this area as kind of niche. I disabuse them of that because you just need to pick up the paper, like every day or any day, and they're talking about sanctions because the sanctions is the number one foreign policy tool of the United States government. Right? And it doesn't make a difference whether it's a Democrat or Republican administration, right? I mean, Trump used it extensively, Biden used it extensively, and whoever wins the election, in a few weeks, will use it extensively. So it is, and that and export control restrictions. So that's what I do. And I first got introduced to when I was at the Federal Reserve, but then when I was at the I've been all these government agencies, but I got a call from the Treasury Department to be their first senior sanctions advisor for the securities industry for OFAC. OFAC is the Office of Foreign Assets Control. It is the office within the Department of Treasury that administers and enforces U.S. economic sanctions.
Sanctions generally work.
Oh God. We don't have. Yeah, I know. One minute. I mean, that's you think that is a seminar for like a whole day, right? But the stock. Okay, no. Okay, here's the stock answer. Then I'll give you the real answer. So the stock answer is that it's not a sprint, it's a marathon. Right? So in other words, they don't really short term, but they do have an impact in the longer term, right? And part of the reason, or the biggest criticism of sanctions is that it's a blunt instrument, right? Because while it's directed at the nefarious governments, right, the impact is felt by the people, right, of those countries. That's one of the big criticisms. The other big criticism of it is that there's too many opportunities for potential arbitrage, right? You can sanction certain countries, right? But like we have sanctions against Iran and Cuba. Europe doesn't, right? Canada doesn't. And then like with Russia, obviously, in the news every day. And, for all sanctions professionals, it's been the Full Employment Act for the last, 2.5 years. But with respect to Russia, there's opportunities for diversion and circumvention, mainly by China, India, UAE, Turkey, and so forth.
So our
Yeah.
time is almost,
Yeah, yeah,
I think it's obligatory to ask you one last question,
yeah.
which is, are there any faculty members who taught you, who stick in your mind?
Well, I would say that, yes. Well, first, I mean,
Well, I know.
Yeah. So the faculty member that does stick in my mind is Eddie Correa, and I'm not sure how long he was here, but he taught constitutional law, and what I actually really liked about Professor Correa was that he really did engage us. He didn't indoctrinate us into one sort of judicial sort of philosophy. He didn't sort of just kind of dismiss, strict constructionalism outright, right? But he forced us to make arguments on both sides, And if law school is not about promoting critical thinking, I don't really know what it is. I mean, that to me is the most
I think
important.
that's a good way to end. Thanks.
Next up is Jeff Spofford. We're switching order slightly. Jeff Spofford, class of 89. He needs to go see a friend who's rowing in the head of the Charles after this. He's a partner with Leon Zero, and he's in conversation with one of my very favorite professors, Carol Mallory. And I can't wait to hear what they have to say. Big thanks to Shaz and Mike Meltzner. Thank you both.
Good morning, everyone. It's nice to be here.
Hold it close, guys.
Oh, can you hear me without this?
No.
Really?
Is it on?
How about now? Now? Yeah? It says it's on.
Now we hear.
Okay, Jeff, my new friend Jeff tells me to speak up. So, Jeff and I have spoken. It was not a 15-minute conversation, let's just say. We're going to try to keep it to 15 minutes, but...
Ian has an extra sign for me that she made. She knows me. It says 5 minutes, then 1 minute.
I heard the
Shut up, Jeff.
Okay, bring it out when necessary. But let's start with why you told me an interesting story about why you chose Northeastern. Like, what was the moment you knew this was the place?
And so, do I need this microphone?
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
I do. All right, we'll use the microphone then. I grew up in Bedford, so not too far away. I'd applied to several law schools. I came to Northeastern's Accepted Students Day. I will never forget going into one of the basement classrooms with a real steep pitch, and they brought in 4 people to talk about their co-op experiences. And one guy got up there and he talked about being the law clerk on the Klaus von Bülow retrial back in the mid-'80s. And he was handing evidence. He was taking in evidence. Another guy got up and he talked about doing his co-op in Hawaii, where he was from. And I forget what the other co-ops were, but I was blown away at the experiences and what people had done. And I remember walking up to Jack Monks, who was the assistant dean at the time and had this big walrus mustache. And I asked him, where can I give you my $500? I am ready to apply today. I was sold. And that's why I chose Northeastern Law. Back to you. And I know one thing I have to do is I have to apologize to Margaret Burnham that I called her because Neil told me I had to apologize. The best thing about coming to Northeastern, frankly, was I got my wife, Juliana. Not only was that the best thing, but today is our 33rd wedding anniversary. Happy anniversary. Juliana's cousin is here from the Netherlands, and his son is rowing in the head of the Charles. He's doing a semester with the University of North Carolina. So we need to be on the Elliott Street Bridge at 12:30. Professor Burnham, I'm sorry. I want to make, I mean, she's one of my idols. You know, my hand's now known as one of the best books you can ever get. And so with that.
Wow, that was well done, because I would hate to have to apologize to
Yeah.
Professor Burnham. So you joked when we spoke that you were chosen to be just like the mundane version of a NUSL graduate. Clearly you aren't. But tell us about one of your most memorable cases.
Well, we talked about this, and I haven't worked for the federal government or tried to bribe anybody in China. I've worked for. Oh, did I get it wrong? I've been a small firm lawyer in Worcester. I went out to where my first co-op was. They hired me. I was there 5 years, and now I've been with the current firm for 30 years. I do small firm work. I was lucky enough to get appointed to some interesting cases, and probably the most interesting case I had, and interesting on the timing, is that this particular case I was appointed to advance the right to die for a man who had had a brainstem stroke, had been rendered in a locked-in condition where he was fully conscious but could only move his eyeballs. And for 2.5 years, he and his fiancée, this happened the day after Thanksgiving. He was engaged to be married in 3 weeks. He was a remarkably athletic. He skied Tuckerman's Ravine a couple of times. Fiancé was great. Eventually, after searching for a solution to the locked-in condition, they couldn't find any. And he didn't want to go on like that. Now, his fiancée, ironically, had gotten guardianship over him out of the Middlesex Probate and Family Court. They'd lived in Billerica. He was originally from Clinton, Massachusetts, and his parents got guardianship probably on or about the same day in Worcester. And so they had competing ideas. Parents, while he languished in a co-op about 5 months in, his fiancée said he doesn't want to live like this, wanted to pull the plug. Parents dead set against it. He eventually regained consciousness. Ultimately, he said to the facility, through his fiancée, developed a speech communication chart, put it up above his head, divided the alphabet into 4 numbered quadrants. If he was going to spell Miel's name, you would ask him, Paul is the first letter in group 1, no movement. Group 2, no movement. Group 3, lifts his eyes, is the first letter L, no movement. M, looks up. And that's how you communicated with him. And he was now when I was appointed to represent him, he was now in a facility in Worcester County. He was watching videos of math and science. He was 110% there intellectually, but unable to move anything except the eyeballs. So one of the coincidences to this, being asked this question is, I just went to one of my classmates' retirements on Thursday down in the Cape. Judge Angela Ordonez retired from the Probate and Family Court. And at the retirement was Judge Susan Rickey, now retired, but from Worcester County, and she's been the Chief Justice of the Probate Court. Judge Rickey was the judge who appointed me to this case, and we got into talking about this. Judge Rickey had appointed me to be his counsel, had appointed Carol Erskine, who became the first justice of the juvenile court in Worcester for years, as the guardian ad litem. And it was interesting to talk to Judge Rickey at the table about this case just 2 days ago, knowing I probably would be talking about it. But this was 1996. I remember the dates. The law in Massachusetts was and still is, any competent adult can choose or refuse any form of medication. But the cases in Massachusetts that interpret that policy all have to do with substituted judgment. It goes back to the Paul Brophy case was a firefighter comatose from his injuries in a fire. And the decisions made by the SJC that we respect the autonomy, the individuality of all competent adults in Massachusetts to choose or refuse. But in that one, they were choosing for him, substituted judgment. And there was another case out of the, remember the Belchertown School was part of it. But in our case, Paul Papacalos, the young man, would look you in the eye and tell you what he wanted. And it was great. My first visit with him, I went out to the facility. His fiancee, Judy, was there. So she did the interpreting, but I walked in and he started laughing. Laughter is an involuntary reflex. So even if you're in a locked-in condition, when you start to laugh, you smile, you guffaw, you sound like anybody else laughing. And he laughed, and Judy said, "Paul, why are you laughing?" And he blinked out. His tie makes him look like a Republican. He was from Clinton, Massachusetts. They haven't even let a Republican across the town line. So the tie came off, and Paul and I got along. We got along great. One time I walked in, he blinked out. He started laughing again, and Judy said, "Paul, what is it?" He said, "What's black and white and red all over?" "I don't know, Paul. A lawyer with a Doberman attached to him." I said, "Paul, there are no locked-in jokes. I can't come back at you." But we had to have Paul, because any competent adult is the standard, we had Paul examined by a psychologist out of UMass, a real young guy at the time. He's still there. He called me about 6 months ago. He needed the docket number because he was testifying somewhere. He had to give all the information of where he testified. He was an opera singer in his off time. So when he testified and when you prepared him to testify, he was absolutely remarkable. And so he did an exam of Paul, and he came back that he was competent. Paul was a bit of a hard head. He hadn't made a lot of friends with the nursing staff in the facility he was in because he was demanding. And I said before the thing, I said, "Paul, you have to give me the name of a nurse, somebody here that can interpret for you during the hearing." And he blinked out, "I want Carol Erskine." I said, "Well, you can't. She's an officer of the court. She's a guardian ad litem. She can't interpret." "I want Carol." "Paul, you don't get it. I'm getting frustrated." And he blinks out, "What part of no don't you understand?" So I brought a motion for Carol, and she was appointed as the interpreter. We interpreted, she interpreted, we did the hearing. I can tell you we did the hearing on November 7, 1996, in the facility. Paul was dressed in regular clothes, in a wheelchair. He had a tracheotomy. And Paul was just, he was incredible. And he testified through Carol. Phil Candilis, the psychologist, testified. I asked Judge Rickey at the end. She took the matter under advisement. I said, "Judge, I'd ask you not to take it under advisement. There's no contested evidence. Today, here in this room, he deserves your decision." And she told me the other day she was so pissed off at me. She would acknowledge in all the forums she and I have spoken in about the case that was the right thing to do because he deserved it. He deserved that respect. He waited until November 28th, the day after Thanksgiving, so he wouldn't ruin Thanksgiving for the families. And he started his fast, and he died on December 11th. I was his healthcare proxy for the last day. They had to call me, and I refused food and water for him. And then Judge Rickey and her clerk and I cried in the hallway outside her courtroom. So when you ask about it, you know, I look back, 1996 is a long time ago, but it's still one of those cases that made me proud to be a lawyer, to think about what we do in the big schemes, in the small schemes, but what we do for people. And that was one of them. So I went on for a bit, and Julianne hasn't hit me.
Yeah, we're about to.
We're okay.
No.
You want this? Okay.
Apparently I need this. That gave me chills, so thank you. And it's a good segue to my next question, because the other thing we talked at length about is your involvement in mentoring in Worcester.
And I'll go pretty quick. Judge Angela Ordonez, who just retired from the bench, was a great law school classmate of ours. She became the Chief Justice of the Probate and Family Court, and she came out to Worcester for an event. Judge Ordonez had started a program called the Tiered Community Mentoring Program, where a high school student was matched to a college student, was matched to a law student, was matched to a lawyer. 4-part tier of team. And she had that going, and now it's been going in Boston for 16 years. When she was out visiting Worcester and on her tour of the state as the chief, she was talking about this at a reception, her program. She turned and she said, and Jeff's going to start it out here in Worcester. So I've been running the program now for 8 years in Worcester. Judge Ordonez's program has gotten accolades, twice recognized nationally by the American Bar Association for what it does. We reach out to a lot of different communities. We're looking for a lot of representation for people of color from the high schools that we reach out to. And we're looking for any marginalized community members, and the idea to introduce them to the legal field, not just lawyers and judges, but we try to get them introduced to court officers, probation officers, people that might be otherwise in the legal field. It's been a tremendously satisfying program. I know Juliana's spoken at it before. Andrea Zoya, who's one of our board members for NUSL, is here, and she's now a mentor for us. So it's been great. So that's it. And I encourage anybody who's here and looking to get involved in mentoring, please reach out, and we'd love to get you to be a mentor for next year. Down to a minute.
Full disclosure, I just have to say, I'm not doing this purely out of the goodness of my heart. My daughter is in college at Holy Cross and is now going to be in the tiered mentoring program. So thank you, Miel.
In our conversation.
From our conversation, so thank you, and maybe someday she'll be here. If the Okay, we got 1 minute less now, and I'm thrilled to ask you, because I was inspired when you answered it for me, what's your life mission? Or
That was it'll be quick. I think my life mission is involvement, is getting engaged in what you can get engaged in, being active where you're going to be. My kids played soccer, so I coached the soccer team. I liked that. My youngest daughter, we have 3 daughters, I'm really lucky. My youngest daughter sucked at soccer, so she wanted to do shows. And there was a Westboro community theater show that she wanted to do, so I auditioned with her. And we were in Annie the Musical together. Talk about it. We had such a great time. The kids were ski racers, so they got into ski racing. So I helped run the team. I wound up being the president of the league. I was the commissioner for the high school race league. Why? I was going to be at the practices. I was going to be at the races. So why not be involved? I've been involved in the Worcester County area. I'm involved with the Massachusetts Bar Association. I was the president of the Worcester County Bar Association. Recently, I'm on the NUSL board with Miel, with Andrea, and Emily's up here in the back. We have a great group of people, and I love getting involved. So I love being involved in the planning committee for our reunion. We've got 1989, with all due respect to all the rest of you, 1989 was the best class. There's no doubt. So we're very comfortable in that mantra.
any questions for Jeff?
I didn't even get to shut up Jeff signs.
We were good.
So you can see why we've asked everybody to participate today. Everyone has different and unique talents, and Jeff certainly is involved in many, many things. Next up, thank you, Trisha Elam Walker. She is an author of a well-known book, which I'm sure you'll hear about. She's also an assistant professor of creative writing at Howard University. She is phenomenal, and she dresses with flair, you're going to see. And she will be in conversation with University Distinguished Professor of Law, Margaret Burnham, who runs our Civil Rights and Restorative Justice Project. Is co-director of CLEAR, one of our centers of excellence, and just a phenomenal, phenomenal colleague. Here you both go. Thank you for being here.
Miel, thank you so much, Miel. It's great to be here. Someone famously said, we're not going back. We are going back from 1989 to 1979. I'm thrilled to be here in conversation with Trisha, who I've known for pretty much a good part of her life. I was her babysitter way back when. Her father was my chief when I was on the bench, and so we go back. And Trisha took this wonderful 1979 law degree, and she turned it into something really special that has nothing to do with a courtroom, nothing to do with a law office, but touches a important part of her brain. She is a utterly fabulous and well acclaimed creative writer. So tell us how you got there.
First of all, thank you so much for having me, for inviting me, Miel, for doing this. Margaret, my dad loved Margaret, and so this is really meaningful. How I got there. Well, first of all, when I got out of college, well, when I was getting out of college, I didn't know what to do with my life, as many of us have experienced. And I knew that I liked to write, but I didn't see a path to making money doing that. But my dad was a lawyer and a judge. My uncle was a lawyer. So I knew that. And I thought, okay, I can do that. And I only applied to one law school. And that was because of the pass fail, I have to say. And also, I think.
A little truth telling here.
You know, I had heard so much about and seen movies about the Socratic method, and I knew that wasn't going to work for me. But I also felt that there was a creative vibe to Northeastern, and I was right about that. So one of the things I loved so much about law school was Steve Subrin's legal imagination class. And we read novels in there. We talked about creative things. We also, of course, talked about the law. And I enjoyed law school. I have no regrets about doing that. When I left, I practiced for 16 years. I think always kind of looking for my spot in the law. I did a lot of different things. And in one of my jobs, I was always kind of writing on the side. And in one of my jobs, as an administrative law judge, I remember my boss saying to me, you know, your decisions sound like stories. And I thought that he was angry about that, but he wasn't. He promoted me, I got a raise. But I started thinking, okay, wait a minute. So maybe I need to figure out, you know, how to really do this. So I ultimately went back to school, got an MFA in creative writing, wrote my novel, and that was the beginning.
That's great. And so, Tricia, you actually come from a family of letters, not your father, of course, is a judge, and your brother at Stanford is a well-known professor and critic of African American theater. And of course, your brother, Guru, was an utterly fabulous singer. And your mom was a librarian here in the city of Boston. So this is not you. So you didn't really stray too far off the path. But what adjustments did you have to make as you moved from legal career, thinking sort of in terms of law, to a career in creative writing?
First of all, I really appreciate you talking about my family because that was important in this journey. Writing was important, books were important. We had one TV, a black and white TV that my mom brought out only for family watching. So we had to read, which at first felt like a punishment, but ultimately felt like everything in the world because I felt like I traveled places, I met all kinds of different characters. And so, you know, that was an important thing. And when I decided I was going to change from the law to writing, I remember being really nervous about telling my dad. And one of the things he said, I had to tell him. And when I did tell him, he told me that he had written a musical and all these other creative things I never knew anything about. And so I felt like, okay, he approves of this journey. He was one of my biggest fans and had a big, huge book party for me at the Dudley Library. But to answer your question, I really don't feel like that I lost anything. I felt like almost like it was the opposite. I was finding ways to find the creative in the legal things that I did. I feel like a lot of my clients became characters. Many times, I think about all the different stories and all the different wonderful people I met as a lawyer because I did so many different things. At one point, I was an attorney, a landlord-tenant attorney for people who were turning their apartments into co-ops. And those, I can remember, I can see their faces. They were characters, and some of them show up in my writing in different ways. And so I think that, just like I said, my boss said my decisions sounded like stories. I think that I ended up bringing the creative. I remember one place my boss wrote an evaluation. He said she's a good attorney, but she doesn't dress like one. So, I always try to find ways to, fit both things in.
That's great. That's great. So in 2000, your book Breathing Room, your novel Breathing Room, that's your first novel, and it features a lawyer and a probation worker and other folks who clearly come out of the early experiences you had working in the law here in Boston and in Washington. So what are you working on now? Do you have a novel on the table? I will say also, Tricia is an award-winning children's book writer. So it might be also interesting to hear about the difference in as you approach your novels and your children's books.
As mentioned, my novel came out of my MFA program. In that program, we had to either write a collection of short stories or a novel. So I wrote a novel. It was something I always wanted to do. And it was wonderful. I needed the discipline of that program to get it done. And I was really fortunate in finding an agent really quickly and getting the book published. After that, it was more of a journey trying to get the next thing done. And I think with Breathing Room, I imagine that was during the time when Oprah had the book club and everyone became, best-selling authors. So I just knew Oprah was going to call me because we have the same birthday. And literally, my dad sent her. I don't know if she received it, but my dad made a photocopy of my license and highlighted January 29th, 1954, so Oprah could see. Anyway, I'm still waiting for that girl to call me. When that did not happen, I had to figure out, okay, what do I do now? I ultimately started teaching high school, and it was a wonderful creative high school, Duke Ellington in Washington, D.C., and I headed up the creative writing program there, and it was just a really great experience. But it was hard to write and do that at the same time. So ultimately, I also started thinking about my mom, who loved children's books. She headed the Boston Public Schools library program and made sure that there were diverse books in all the schools in Boston, and she was just a major force. And so, I feel like she's looking down because I'm writing children's books now. I just happen to be going to VU after this because they're having a Ghanaian Children's Book Festival, and this book is about a Ghanaian grandmother who has traditional African markings on her face, and her little granddaughter, who loves her dearly, is worried about taking her to Grandparents' Day, thinking people might, make fun of the marks or whatever. And so it's a book about celebrating culture, et cetera. And this book did win an award, I'm sad to say. In any case, so this was this was not the first children's book I wrote. I was talking to a cousin of mine who's a renowned artist and had been illustrating children's books, Aqua Holmes. She's a Roxbury girl. And she kept saying to me, we should do something together because we pretty much grew up together. And she sent me some of her collages that she wasn't doing anything with. And I looked at her collages and looked at the stories and the characters in her collages and wrote a story called Dream Street. So that was what we sold first. And just because Aqua had so many other books and they don't like books to compete with each other, they asked me to do a separate book. So that's what this came out of. And now I'm working on another book from Random House. So I'm excited about that. I teach creative writing at Howard. I love my students. I love teaching that. I have a great schedule of 2 classes and one day on campus, one day on Zoom. So it's just good.
So tell us about, let me ask the Meltzer question. Okay. So at law school here, you've mentioned Professor Susan and his class on the legal imagination. What do you remember about that class? But also, are there other professors who you had here whose work stayed with you and has helped you influence your creative work?
Yeah. It's so funny when I talk to other lawyers who did not go to Northeastern, nobody says they love their law school. So that's really something really special about Northeastern. So yes, Steve Subrin, Dan Gavelber. I have to say, in '79 we didn't have any teachers of color. So Dan Gavelber, Judy Brown, somebody else mentioned. And I don't know those are the three that stand out for me right now. Maybe Emily. Emily is my classmate, and we've stayed in touch. I don't know if you remember other folks, Emily. And also Jody's here. Where is she? Somewhere. Yes, Jody. You guys might remember some others. But, our classes, I feel like I was enriched every day being here. I always enjoyed coming. Great discussions, I don't think anyone ever felt put on the spot. It was just a great experience, and I don't know if I know directly how it, transferred into what I'm doing now, except that I think about as an instructor, the kind of instructor I want to be is the kind of instructor I got here. Instruction I got here.
That's great. And you didn't say, what are you working on now?
Oh. So I'm working on another children's book. I'm not even going to talk about it because another writer told me when you talk about it, it doesn't happen. So stay tuned for that. But I am working on a novel that I've been working on for 10 years. I'm sorry to say that, but sometimes it bees like that. But hopefully, both of them will be coming out soon.
That's fabulous. Thank you.
Next up, we have David Heilbrunner, an Academy Award nominated filmmaker. So again, the creative process is coming. He's class of 1984. He's in conversation with a film buff who sees a lot of films, Professor Jeremy Paul. Welcome, and thank you both for being here today.
Good morning. Yes, so we're very happy to be here. It's nice to see many of you again. Our guest today, David Hubbard, has been in 20 films. And for those of you who have kids who can help you with the remote control, I watched two of them recently. One was on HBO Max and one was on Paramount Plus. Traffic Stop, the Academy Award winning nominated film, which I guess you made with your wife too, right? Yeah. And RIP T-shirts. And I can say from these films they were great, and you really have had a public interest career, even though your career has been included in many things. So maybe you can just start by telling us a little bit about your story, what you did when you got out of school, how you ended up in film. That's very interesting.
Thanks. I was thinking about, how did Northeastern play into becoming a filmmaker and a writer? I used to write books before that. And I realized the object lesson I got out of Northeastern is this one moment of deep regret that I remember. We had the co-op system, and we had these 3x5 cards on a bulletin board that you'd go to. This is long before computers. Probably, I'm sure it's done online now. But you go every lookup, and they'd put these new 3x5 cards up, and you'd go like, "Wow, what's new? What can I find that I want to do for a semester?" And I saw that there was a 3x5 card that said, "Draft the Constitution for the Marshall Islands, motorboat included." And I didn't do it. I didn't even apply. I went and worked for a large firm downtown. Nothing against large firms, but it was definitely not my jam. And for the rest of my entire life, my kids even know this story, they all say, Marshall Islands, take advantage of it. If something exciting and risky comes your way, I know for a fact that I would be a fuller person if I had done that thing. So that's sort of the guiding principle that led me down the risky path of filmmaking, which I went to law school because I wanted to make a difference. I'm definitely a child of the 70s and, saw lawyers as warriors, and I wanted to do that, and I was enough of a risk taker. I was raised as a rock and roller as a kid, and so Northeastern was just the perfect fit for me because it was like that. Everybody here was like, to hell with, the straight and narrow path. Let's go shake it up. Let's go do something. Let's make the world a better place. And filmmaking was really a natural adjunct to that. I still use the legal stuff that I learned like every single day. I don't regret law school for a nanosecond if it made me a better filmmaker. And definitely, my wife and I have a film company, and there's contracts and employment law and fair use doctrine and copyright, intellectual property, all this stuff, right? So anyway, that's a long answer, but it really began at the bulletin board down at the old building.
So you've made movies about a whole variety of topics, gun safety, police brutality, immigrants being sent to Martha's Vineyard. What kind of thing grabs you? How do you decide this is something that I want to dive into and make a film about it?
That's always like the tough question, because filmmaking isn't, I used to be a writer, and you could write an article and you could just write it. You could make some phone calls, interview people, and send it to your editor, and if they like it, they publish it. But filmmaking, there's a lot of moving parts. You have to actually, if you want it to be seen by anybody, you have to have somebody pay for it. And they have to believe that you'll get eyeballs to view it. And so it starts with, this is an important story that needs to be told, and that's what gets you there. But it's a very Machiavellian process to be utterly cold-blooded about it. That's how you survive in the business. Are the people, can they tell their story well? Will this play out in a cinematic format? Is it, even if it's really important, it's just the story sort of flatlines. So there's a million things you think to why you choose the stories we've done. But I mean, at the core, it has to have that first element, which is, I think the story needs to be told. Although every now and then the phone rings. I mean, I was summering on, I have a house in Martha's Vineyard that my family's had forever, so don't get any funny ideas about mansions. But phone rings and it's HBO, and they said this activist named Sandra Bland was just found hung in a Texas jail cell, a woman of color, a powerhouse of a person. And they said, do you want to make a film about it? And I mean, you follow real time as they investigate what happened to Sandra Bland. And I just remember thinking, they're never going to say yes, but I'm never going to get a call like this again. And I got on the phone, and lo and behold, they did say yes, and we did make the film. But so sometimes it happens like that. It happens a million different ways.
So in a lot of ways, what all of us do is storytelling in one way or another, not quite as maybe sophisticated and video friendly as yours. What have you learned in your film career about storytelling that you might want to give us some awesome advice?
I mean, the simple rules, enter the scene at the last possible moment and leave at the first possible moment. For starters, don't waste people's time. Everybody's busy. We're in such a this is what haunts me all the time, is we're in an incredibly oversaturated environment. I mean, I think that's why people like series so much, is when you sit down and you just want to chill at the end of the day. You don't have to think about what am I going to watch, because that's just that's too big. What am I going to watch? I don't know. There's 8,000 things out there. But if I'm in the middle of a series, I just go, oh, cool, episode, season 3, episode 9. The rule is don't waste people's time. Make sure you really have something to say. Hone it down. Get to the point. Don't be afraid of it being too long or too short. Just say what needs to be said. And then you just got to roll the dice, because it is, risk taking. It's the Marshall Islands thing. Everything circles back to that bullet. Take a risk. High risk, high reward. I can't. A friend of mine and I want to put together something called the Canned Film Festival, because I have, like everybody, some films that will never be seen, and that's okay. That's part of that's the ride. You have to be willing to take some bumps on the road.
So before you were in film, you were a prosecutor, right? And you wrote a book about that. Tell us a little bit about that.
All right, that definitely has a Northeastern component. You all remember Dan Gavelberg, for sure, right? He was, I think it was the very first lecture I ever attended was Torts with Dan, and I just immediately went, this guy's so charismatic and so funny. And at one point, I told him I was considering working for the DA's office. And he said, well, if nothing else, you're going to have anecdotes for a lifetime. And in fact, that I was sold, and I applied and got the job. And he was right. I did. I did. And I went, no one, this is before even Scott Turow had published, like 1L, I think maybe it just come out, but he hadn't written Presumed Innocent, and there wasn't all these like CSI shows. So the actual, like a gritty, real-time look at what goes on in the big city prosecutor's office just hadn't been done. And I was like, wow, do I see an opportunity to do this? And I took all these anecdotes and then tried to put them together into a story arc and to make a point about that the justice system needs reform. I did it in true Northeastern style of like, let's make something positive and impactful about it and not just have fun along the way, but don't make that the only thing you're doing. And I did, and I got an agent, just like we just heard right now, and it sold, and I never looked back. But thank you, Dan.
I was telling David last night that Kamala Harris came and spoke at Northeastern in like 2018, or maybe when she was running for Senate, and she talked about being a prosecutor and how you could actually have more of an impact as a progressive prosecutor than you might as a defense attorney. Some of our students loved it, some of them were not quite so sure. So how about some advice for even though this is not a student audience, for me and faculty who are here, to tell our students about what might make them have a successful career when they're out of school?
I mean, the average age here is a little higher for the usual advice giving, so I'm not going to go there. I'm going to sort of, I'm going to change the question a bit, but a little bit. I was going to do it anyway, so what the hell. No, it's really a question at this point of like, what do you do with your life, right? I mean, are we all sort of facing like, what have I done with it? What am I proud of? What do I regret? And it just reminds me of, because, coming back to your 40th law school reunion, you realize time's moving along. And this has nothing to do with law school and it has nothing to do with film or anything, but it's the story of a woman who was very close to me. She's no longer on this planet. And I knew her, when I met her when she was about 80. And she had never had a career of any kind. And at 65, she decided she would pick up a camera and start taking photographs. She just loved it. And she ended up becoming really a famous photographer and was on the cover of Zoom and had the Smithsonian, did whole exhibitions based on her work. She died in her 90s, and she had this enormous, explosive, creative career starting at age 65, never having picked up a camera before. So my career advice is, look at her. Take a look, and you don't know. Her name is Ruth, and I forget her, Gilbert. Gilbert, Ruth Gilbert. She was from Monterey, California, which is where I met her years ago. But that would be, I don't know if it's advice, it's more like just, hey guys, let's all get on the train. I don't know. That's the train I'm on, anyway.
No, that's great. It sounds like the Marshall Islands. I mean, So usually in these things, I always ask people, tell us 3 books that you've recently read, but for you, that wouldn't make sense. You should tell us 3 films that have influenced you or that we should all see.
Yeah, I'm glad Dean Paul asked me that yesterday, and I'm glad he did, because one of the privileges of having survived in the film business is you get invited to be things like, I vote on the Oscars, right? Careful what you wish for, because you watch hundreds of films every year. So if he had said pick 3, I'd be like, do you have like an hour while I just think silently? So I thought about it all night, and I decided I'm going to give you something new, something old, and something shamelessly of mine. The old is O.J. Made in America. I don't know if you guys saw that series by my friend Ezra Edelman. It's brilliant. It's the most it's an exhaustive but never exhausting work about America in a way. Even using O.J. as this lens, it's just great. So watch that. New, there's a film that just came out of Sundance last year called Daughters. And it's the premise of Daughters is about young women whose dads are incarcerated. And in the current, at least in DC where this is set, the current regime there is you can't just go visit your parents, your dad when you want. You usually have to pay money to go, and even when you go, you often do it through a TV screen. And it's dehumanizing and heartbreaking system. So this woman comes along and says, let's do a father-daughter dance. By God, they said yes. And so there's 10 weeks where the inmates are prepared for this. They're going to go, this is going to get heavy, guys, you know, and the girls are getting ready. And I mean, I have a daughter. She's now 27. But I mean, I left the film. There was a Q&A with the director. I said, I'm out of here. I'm going home and hugging my daughter, man. But it's an extremely beautiful film. I cried buckets during that thing. So Daughters, and it'll be coming out soon. It might be out now. If it's not, it will be very shortly. And then my wife and I did a film about 10 years ago called The Cheshire Murders, which got rejected by every film festival in the United States, but was the biggest hit on HBO that summer, and then was rerun by CNN, which they almost never do because they're somewhat competitive. So it was actually a very impactful film, and it's about the death penalty. And it's about the futility of the death penalty, but told very obliquely. You have to. It was the most nightmarish crime in the history of the state of Connecticut, and this doctor survived, and he ended up becoming incredibly political. The state of Connecticut was poised to abolish the death penalty, and they kept it alive just for this case. And the two defendants, who have nothing good you can say about what they did, it was horrible, said, we'll plead guilty and take life without the possibility of parole. And Dad hung in there and said, nope, I want death. And he talked legislators into going along with it. He talked the government into putting on back-to-back death penalty trials with penalty phases, and it cost millions of dollars. And he won. And shortly after, Connecticut abolished the death penalty, and the Supreme Court came in and said, you can't execute these guys. It's just a matter of timing. And it's a film about that. And you'll meet the people along the way, and I'm really proud of it.
One detail, is it now available for streaming and one of the?
Oh yeah, it's still on HBO Max. So.
Well, thank you very much. It was great to chat with you. And
Any questions?
It's more of a comment. So, David, I'm from Connecticut. I know that case, and I never watched the movie, but I will watch it now.
Good.
Yeah, I know you're next year.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Appreciate it. Thanks. All right, y'all.
Next up, we're thrilled to have Patrick Parker, class of '99. Representing. He's the president of Elevate. He's a consultant. He opened this firm recently, and we're going to hear about that. He's in conversation with Professor Daryl Walton, who's the head of our community business clinic. Thank you both for being here.
Thank you, Neil. I'm excited to be here with Patrick Parker. As Neil said, he is the president of Elevate and from the class of '99, which is probably represented. But Patrick, I wonder if I should give a trigger warning because there may be words like corporate, business, during this conversation, but hopefully we'll be able to talk about how those terms are relevant to your life, but then also how they still connect to the NUSL experience and the work you do now. What I want to do is start off with a question that asks for a broad reflection. So instead of jumping into, why NUSL, I would love to ask you to take a step back and look broadly at your life and say, looking at all that you've done and where you are today, are you where you thought you would be at the start of your journey?
Thanks, Daryl. First, Tricia, '99 was the best class. Sorry. I love law school just like you. And I agree that I've met a ton of people in my life, and most of the people who are lawyers, we talk about law school, and all of them hated their experience. And I'm the only one that says, oh, I loved my law school. I love my experience. But I echo that. In terms of did I think that I would be where I am today? So one of my last former boss has always asked this question. He was the #2 guy at UBS, and he would always answer the question. And I was his chief of staff. That was my last job at UBS, and also had a portfolio of some legal work. And so I would sit through his answers, and he would always say he had a number of jobs at UBS, and he eventually became, he was CFO, he ran a trading desk, all these different things, and then he became the #2 guy. And he would always say that he never planned anything, he just did the best that he could, and he ended up in these different roles. My answer is totally different than that, and I recognize that because I hear other people say, yeah, I just kind of ended up here. And I knew I was going to be where I am today. But that's just to say, and we talked about this, some people talk about their North Star. I call it my mental map. And I thought about the difference. So the North Star is, what you eventually, what draws you somewhere. For me, the mental map is the journey and the different locations I expect to be at certain points. And I've always had that thought. So I always wanted to be an entrepreneur. And I worked my way backwards, which is actually a book, an Amazon book, Working Backwards. And it's actually the same theme of, you guys would remember Stephen Covey, who says, begin with the end in mind. It's the same concept. But I wanted to be an entrepreneur, and I knew if I were going to be an entrepreneur, I actually had to have the resources to take the risk. So I said, okay, starting at Northeastern, I wanted to be a lawyer, practice, and I thought about all the different things I needed to do to get into a corporate role to eventually be able to leave that corporate role to become an entrepreneur. So in that sense, my mental map always told me where I was going to be. And I will say this, I think we all have our own mental maps. Some of us try to either ignore them or not follow them, but eventually you get drawn to them. And I think that's what happened to me. I got drawn to the things that I knew I wanted to do, and I actually ended up in those places.
So, no problem. Thanks, Patrick. So, you talk about, you're pretty much where you thought you would be or planned to be, the mental map. But let's take a step back and let's start at the beginning, right? And so we all have heard and we all know how special NUSL is and how it's focused on public interest, social justice. And you're saying, I want to be an entrepreneur, right? And what I want to know is, what about NUSL? Like as a professional student looking at law schools, like why NUSL? Like what drove you to NUSL if, entrepreneurship was really your focus?
Yeah, so public interest was my initial focus, but I also knew I wanted to be an entrepreneur. I chose, and by the way, I don't remember when we were in law school it was referred to NUSL, so when I heard it the first time, it kind of felt like when all of these corporate companies sort of shorten their names, they go from I don't know, Dunkin' Donuts to Dunkin', and you're kind of like, you got to accept it. But anyway, that's what I felt. But so Northeastern, it was a public interest law school. Public interest drew me because of my background, my family background, the neighborhoods I grew up in. But again, I always wanted to be an entrepreneur because I wanted control over my time and my destiny. The reason why I picked Northeastern was when I was in undergrad, I had a friend who was going to law school, and she told me she was going to law school. I didn't have any intention on going to law school. And she said, but you should come to this law school forum. It's like the movie, someone referenced, I'm going to go to law school. Trisha, you referenced. It's the movie Madagascar. I don't know what I want to do with my life. I think I'll go to law school. It was one of those moments. So I went to, it was the World Trade Center in New York, and I'm from Brooklyn. And I went to the Twin Towers. I went to the World Trade Center, and there were a whole bunch of law schools there. And Northeastern was one. I walked up to the desk or the little kiosk they had, and I got this really good feeling about the school. It was in Boston. Boston's a college town. And then, I started to I thought about other law schools, but as I was trying to make a decision, I read an article about David Dean Hall in the Wall Street Journal, and it was like so timely because I was thinking about law school, and they're highlighting like Dean Hall from Northeastern in the Wall Street Journal. And so I got pretty excited about it. I visited the law school, and I just felt like the place for me. And I think finally the co-op program was huge because I thought I went to Southern Connecticut State University for undergrad, State University, and I thought, I didn't go to a big undergrad. For me to get a job post-law school, the co-op was going to be instrumental because it was going to allow me to make connections. And that's why I chose Northeastern.
Awesome. And so let's just dive into the co-op experience, right? As we talked, you talked about having a variety of experiences. And so we know that the co-ops provide the hands-on experience, the experiential learning. And so I guess my question is to you is like, what impact, I mean, you already said that it was impactful, but what impact did the co-ops have on your journey? And if you could just share about some of your experiences as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think the number one impact the co-op had on my journey was by doing the co-op. My first co-op was a judicial internship in the Southern District of New York. And I worked for I worked for the judge, but I mainly worked for the two law clerks. And they gave me real work. And I was a journalism major in undergrad. So I felt pretty good about my writing. And so they gave me the work, and obviously it was still not up to par to lawyerly writing. But I felt confident enough that I could do the work, and they gave me this real work. And I got some great feedback. And I had other co-ops where I wrote some motions, and there were some victories that we had. One was the U.S. Attorney's Office. So the co-ops gave me this confidence that I could actually go out in the world and be a lawyer. And when I went out in the world to become a lawyer, I actually felt like I was more prepared than lawyers from other law schools. And so that, yeah, it was key to instrumental to my practicing.
I mean, that's awesome. I mean, I think that is a part of our blood, right? Is that experiential learning, that getting that hands-on up front, so that you are more practice ready, right? We see it in our co-ops, we see it in our clinics, all our other experiential learning opportunities. And so, you talk about being an entrepreneur, and then we talked about just now your experience, on a co-op that wasn't necessarily business focused or corporate focused. And so when we talked, you talked about the fact that you kind of saw essentially two pathways outside of, exiting law school. One of them was the corporate route, and one of them was more geared towards maybe federal prosecution or other, interests in that regard. And what I would like to hear is, like, how did you balance your different interests and ultimately make the decision, as a graduate, like which way to go? Because we know that it kind of creates a track for you. So if you could share about that, I'd love to hear more.
So first, let me say, I didn't say this, that my first internship in the Southern District of New York led to indirectly to I did two clerkships when I graduated. One was the Connecticut Appellate Court, the second was in the Eastern District of New York. And in the Eastern District, I got that job because Judge Sterling Johnson, who's no longer here, knew Judge Lowe, who was the judge I worked for. And he really respected Judge Lowe. And it also helped that one of my classmates clerked for Judge Johnson the year before, so I think she helped pull my resume. But making that connection was how I got that sort of job. But in terms of your question about the different paths, I wanted to be a federal prosecutor. But I wanted to be a federal prosecutor because I wanted to be a real lawyer. I thought being a federal prosecutor was being a real lawyer. And I was going to learn how to be a real lawyer if I was in court on the federal level. And so there were these branches. From law firm, either I was going to go directly in-house or I was going to go to the U.S. Attorney's Office and then go in-house. So I had this decision to make. I actually applied to the Eastern District twice and withdrew my application both times. It was under Loretta Lynch, and both times, the first time my daughter was about to be born, and I thought financially it just wasn't the right move. And then the second time, I started to think about, do I really want to go and take that path, knowing I want to go straight to in-house position. And I just decided against it. I also interned at the U.S. Attorney's Office in Boston Criminal Division. And George Vian, who I don't know if he's still a federal prosecutor there, he told me back then, he said, you don't want to do this work. And he said, go into corporate America and, do that because you bring this stuff home and it's not good stuff. And I thought about that years later, but I knew I wanted to do one of those two things, and I just decided that I would just take the corporate path as opposed to go and become a federal prosecutor. Fun fact, Breon Peace, who's the Eastern District of New York U.S. Attorney, was Judge Johnson's former law clerk a few years ahead of me. And Judge Johnson wanted all of his clerks to be federal prosecutors. So I kind of went against what Judge Johnson wanted, but he's got a whole slew of other former clerks who've become U.S. attorneys and taken that path.
Yeah, I mean, I think it fits with your map, though, right? Is forging your own path in your own journey. And so, while it may not fit someone else's desires and goals, it really does seem true to yourself. And so, in thinking about staying true to yourself, you went into corporate America, right? So here at NUSL, again, we are public interest, social justice. Corporate America, corporate practice, not so much, right? And so, I would love to hear how you navigated that, how you either found space for maintaining those goals, or how you responded when you felt that maybe some of the issues that you cared about weren't addressed. And so, if you could just share about your time in corporate law and how that fit with who you are and your goals.
Yeah, so I will say, having come from Northeastern, the public interest background, I think it did help me become a better sort of lawyer in terms of being an advocate for people who, even in that space, are often not heard. So even if you go to Northeastern with this public interest band and you go into corporate America, it doesn't mean like you've sort of wasted your time in Northeastern and not going to another law school, because I think it makes we need people from Northeastern in corporate America. And because we need, humane people in those settings. Not to say they're all inhumane, but we need people in those settings. But also, and the way I reconcile it, some of it is probably post, me leaving those roles, but I always thought about this, that when we go into public interest work and make an impact, not Dave, who was Jeff? Jeff talked about the impact. You make the impact on people individually. But I do think there is room for making an impact on a broader scale. And you're seeing that now in this election with all of these former tech guys, Peter Thiel, Elon Musk, Nelson Peltz, I don't think he's a former tech guy. But anyway, he's another billionaire who they're dumping a whole bunch of money into the Trump campaign, whether you're Republican or Democrat. The whole point is this, that they're expending a lot of funds to change the election or potentially the outcome of the election, and they're doing it in ways because of their own self-interest. And I do think that we need more people with a public interest sort of background to be playing that same game. And that's how I see going into sort of corporate law or corporate America, becoming an entrepreneur, gaining enough resources so that you can take those resources and send it back to the community in more ways than just sort of individuals, but financial resources.
Yeah.
Definitely. And so 1 minute to go. So I'll kind of put the last couple questions together. You can choose which one you want to answer, right? And so we want to hear from you. And so one of the questions is about the thinking about the jump from corporate law to your final destination as an entrepreneur. And we as lawyers tend to be risk averse. And an entrepreneur requires you to be risk seeking or risk accepting. And so your philosophy on on risk and whether or not you thought that decision was risky would be one question. But then the last two questions, and I think might be helpful, is what are your passion projects today, and or like what do you see going forward as what's important or where you want to focus your time, and what do you expect to see in the future?
All right. So with respect to risk, so I did something that most of us say we're not going to do post-law school, and that is to go back to school. I went to your alma mater, and I obtained an MBA. And by doing that, I learned a lot about probabilities, and there was a lot of math focus, and I realized that risk is really about probabilities. So as lawyers, we read a lot of cases, we get exposed to a lot of information and facts, which tell us that if you step this way, there are risks. If you step this way, there are risks. There's risk in everything that we do, and we see that. And we see all these cases that sort of tell us that. So we become very risk adverse, even more so than before going to law school and becoming lawyers. What I learned, and this through sort of corporate America and going back to school and now doing what I'm doing, is risk is really about probabilities. And yes, there's a risk, you walk out this door and something bad happens, right? But you have to look at what's the probability of that thing happening. So when I think about being an entrepreneur, you have to, one of the reasons why I decided that I wanted resources before I became an entrepreneur was because I wanted to lessen the risk, right? So that I could absorb any type of blow or setback, right? So that's the way I look at risk. So when we think about risk, I think lawyers should look more at probabilities when they think about risk, and even when we advise our clients. And I think that's a good way of sort of putting them in tiers and assessing them. Yeah.
Awesome. And just if not time we have remaining, if you just want to talk about passion projects.
Oh, okay. The timekeeper left. So I will just say this. So I will say this. So what I do now is, I wake up every day and I pursue the things that are of interest to me. Two of those things are I look to purchase businesses, and I now look at law firms. I purchased a small law firm recently. Law firms are actually a great business. I think sometimes us as lawyers are not that great at being business savvy, but the margins are great. There's a lot of good things about law firms that if you were to put them together, and that's why large law firms make so much money, that it's a solid business. And I'm also now working on a startup which actually brings together law and AI, data analytics, and machine learning, which is something that I learned when I went back to school. And I have some great partners who are working with me. One guy, I'll say his name, Howard Buffett, who's the grandson of Warren Buffett. He's very interested in this space as well. And that's what I get to work on. And it's just amazing, and it's great. And I love it.
Awesome. So thank you. Yes.
How is AI changing the landscape of law and corporate law more specifically?
Yeah, well, corporate law, I'll answer that question with respect to law generally, and I think it applies to corporate law. So a lot of what lawyers do, and you guys know this, a lot of what lawyers do can actually be done by AI, can be done by machine learning, data analytics. So a lot of that work should be going away to the machines, the computers. But that means it should leave room for the higher, sort of more complex work for lawyers, which I think is what we like to do, the more complex stuff as opposed to the mundane stuff. So in that sense, I think it's changing a lot. And specifically with data analytics, in the law, it's just like being a physician. A good lawyer is someone who's practiced for many, many years, and if you give them a set of facts, they can identify all these different issues and all the risk. But what the machines can do even better than the best lawyer that you can find is take the experience of a bunch of lawyers and in seconds determine what those issues are, what the risks are, and do it at a fraction of the cost that it would take to engage a lawyer. And so I just kind of gave away part of what I'm working on. That is how I think it's going to be changing. And ever since I even graduated law school in '99, when I went to my law firm and then in-house, companies have been saying, we got to get these legal bills down. We got to get these legal bills down. I was at Clifford Chance. Our discovery budget was like $20 million a year, which is insane. UBS's legal budget is probably $300 million a year or something like that, right? So if you could cut that in a, you know, by 1/3, I mean, you're saving $100 million.
I don't have a question. I just have an observation. Sorry, because Patrick was looking at me. As his classmate, I have to say I'm very proud of you. And just acknowledge that Patrick is the same. He's always at school, you have followed that path. I know that you were always very determined, but also very kind to everybody in our class. So it's great to see you up there. And I'm going to talk to you later about that AI because I have a whole different opinion on how it.
Thank you, Lucinda.
And the cost, because I'm a managing partner of a securities litigation firm in New York City. And we'd love to use AI. I know how it would work, but it's fabulously expensive yeah, it's cheap once you own it, but how do you make it less expensive to purchase?
So I don't agree that it's expensive.
Repeat the question.
Oh, the question. So Emily said that she is a partner at a securities litigation firm, managing partner in New York, and that AI is, they would love to use it, but it's expensive, very expensive. And I would say I don't think that's the case. I think the problem with law firms, I don't necessarily think law firms are going to be the ones that will be the vanguards in AI. I don't think they can. I think it's kind of like the whole, Blockbuster, Netflix. Blockbuster never gave away its fees, which it made like, I don't know, $300 million a year on. It's a late fees. It made a lot of money off of that. It never gave that up because that was part of its business model. Netflix was able to come in because it didn't have that as part of its business model. It wasn't part of its strategy. I think the same thing with law firms. Law firms' strategy is to grab lawyers who go to law school. They pay a ton of money to go to law school. So when they get out, they have to have these high salaries. They have to have these huge offices and, Marble and in the city and all these other things. And that means that you have to charge clients a certain amount of money in order to justify sort of your existence. So I don't think law firms are the ones that are going to be instituting it. I think it's going to be someone from outside coming in and forcing the law firms to adopt it. If you're finding it expensive, I think it's because either the firm is trying to do it in-house itself, which is very expensive for you to do it yourself, or your firms are not talking to the right people. Because
So I'll talk to you after. You can
okay.
Big firms are
Right, they're doing
are
it.
doing it in-house.
Yes, but I just don't think that they're going to be the ones in the forefront. That's personal.
Thank you. We're up to our last conversation, and I'm so fortunate to be able to be in conversation with Sophia Lingos. She's a managing partner of her own law firm, Trident Law. She's also an adjunct professor here. We're thrilled to have you, Sophia, and I can't wait to be in conversation with you. Thank you, Patrick. Thank you, Daryl.
Oh, sit down. I thought Neil really liked me, having to go after all these amazing people, and then I stand between you all and lunch. I mean, this is actually a soft seat, but it's a hard seat to be in. So thanks for having me.
Sophia is class of '09, and I've known her since she was a student and feel very fortunate to see her here today. She's been a big supporter of the law school in many different ways. She was president of the Alumni Association. She's been very involved with adjunct teaching, and she will tell you a little bit about that as well. So first, we're starting with our question that we've asked a lot of people, but what brought you to Northeastern Law?
Thanks, Neil. And normally I'd project this is sometimes my classroom. I'm suffering from a cold, so bear with the voice, and hopefully we'll make through. So I wanted to come back to Boston. My family's from the Boston area. I'd gone to high school here. And I had the privilege of working for an individual who was not a law school alumni, but George Sakalaris, who was over at the engineering building, who just raved about the co-op program. And I was already working at his company, and I said, I absolutely want to participate in this. And then it was a no-brainer. I had to be at Northeastern. I needed to do a co-op. No other school had some experiential learning like that. And so I was very grateful to, have my education take place at Northeastern.
We're lucky to have you. Talk about some of your favorite professors. I know that Jim Rowan is one and influenced you, but talk about Jim a little bit and other professors that influenced you while you were here.
So interestingly, Jim and I did not know one another while I was a law student, but I have been so lucky. You know, you have mentorships, sponsorships, friendships, and I got all of those in one in Jim Rowan. And I bet a number of other people in this room could possibly say the same thing, so I know I'm not alone in having him as a special individual in your lives. But I actually got to interact with him when I was developing the course that we started off teaching together, Law Practice Management and Access to Justice. Other professors that I had while I was here, I had Professor Burnham, and I would sit right in the front row. And I learned a lot in that class because you did not want to show up unprepared. I really, I thought I wanted to go into litigation for a period of time. I had Judge Bornstein, who was another mentor of mine, and I was so determined that I was going to do my first co-op with Judge Bornstein that for a week before they even opened up co-op selections, I went to court. I didn't spend much time in a courtroom. And day after day, I was just watching, because once a trial had started, I was really intrigued by this trial. There are not a lot of random people just sitting in the courtroom. So he called me up. He's like, "Can I help you? Are you in the right place? Is something wrong? Like, who do you belong to?" And I was like, well, funny thing. So I'm a 1L at Northeastern. I've heard so much about, your class and co-oping for you, and that's what I'm going to do. And he's like, "This is a first, and I've had 30 years of co-op students." He's like, "I don't think you're, I don't know how we're allowed to do this, but you got the job." I was like, "Great." So that's how I got my first co-op. And then I was really lucky. I had him for evidence. I had him for admin. I, was lucky to have a great ongoing relationship with him as well on the faculty. We had some really amazing professors. I know people have discussed Gevelber, who also made me want to stay with criminal law. Judge Bornstein wanted me to stay with criminal law. Having two small children made me not want to stay with criminal law. But just love being back on campus now. I actually started teaching a year after I graduated, so the 1Ls were 3Ls now that could have been my students, which was an interesting transition. But now 15 plus 3 years later, you can't get rid of me.
I'm going to let you keep that, but talk about your other co-ops.
So my other co-ops in the audience, we have Katie, who is always lovely to see across, who then I had the privilege of sitting on the board with and working. It was Inverness, and I don't even know what it is now. But, it was great to get that. You get so many different types of experiences, so it was really interesting corporate. I wanted to try it on. And then Katie and then a classmate of hers actually hired me on my next co-op, so I wanted to see what firm life was like. So I'd moved on to Davis Mom, where I got to try a little bit of everything. And that was an introduction that I made. And then all three of us sat together on the Northeastern board because Northeastern and the legal field, very small places. So as I tell my students all the time, it takes a lifetime to build these reputations. Everyone knows one another. Be kind to opposing counsel. This is a collegial industry. We do not want to be fighting with, people who could be our friends the next day. And so I was really lucky to, even as a law student, to have those relationships and connections early on, and people who continued to support my career throughout. I moved on to Liberty Mutual, which, I'm in corporate law and business law now, and I will say it's really nice to have an understanding of the insurance industry, because the insurance industry has a big effect on all of operations. And so I learned so much on each of my co-ops and each of my experiences. And now I have my students really dissect those experiences, because I think we have a lot of unhappy lawyers. And I think it's very common that we get out as a 3L. If I ask my 2Ls and I say, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" Because that's kind of what we explore in my class. And they say, "Oh, I'm really interested in entertainment law. I'm really interested in employment law." My 3Ls are like, "I want a job." Who do you know? I was like, "This is okay. It's okay. You can be honest. What is it you really would like to do with your degree? Let's really kind of dive down into it." And so the co-op experience, even if you walk out of the co-op and say, "You know what? I thought I wanted to do employment law. Never want to do that." What a great education. Or you can decide, someone said earlier, I knew I didn't want to be in a big firm. I knew I was going to have a small firm life. You can determine, I want to be in the city, downtown, in a big office, or I want to be in Western Mass. You can use each of these different co-op experiences to try on different aspects of what it's going to be like existing for eternity in this career. And so you can keep building towards the happiness within it.
I bet you're a fabulous teacher. I'm sure you are. So tell me a little bit what led you to own your own firm. What do you like about it? What do you not like about it? What led you to be a solo practitioner? And maybe it was because you graduated in '09. That could have an impact on it.
So my last day of law school was dubbed Black Thursday by the ABA because it was the largest day of layoffs of any law firm. While I had been on co-op, we had a particular client, might start with an L, that they made me go to the office and watch everybody walking out with their boxes so we could say that our firm was there being present. So I was like really on the front row of just watching a lot of devastation my last year of law school. As you notice, I don't. Anyone else come in from our class? We have people coming tonight. Don't worry. And I still have a great relationship with my classmates. But every single person who had a summer associate option, every single offer was canceled. They didn't bring him back for another 2 years. So we had a pretty tough class. But Black Thursday being our last day of law school here was a pretty extreme example. I had always wanted to create my own law firm. And everyone said, you can't do that right out of law school. Is Emily here by chance, Dean Spieler? So Dean Spieler was my dean at the time. And I had to come out of law school and I started taking all these CLEs about law practice management and how to open a firm. And I said, I think it's really a disservice if there are students who might want to learn the business aspect, which is applicable to everyone. Everybody should understand the business operations of a law firm in order to deliver legal services. And she agreed with me, and that's actually how my relationship with Jim began. And she said, Professor Rowan used to teach this. Would you be interested in teaching? I'm like, well, I just graduated, but yeah, let's discuss this a little further. This seems interesting. But I loved that. Talk about a law school that listens and understands. She saw a need. We were all trying to figure out what to do with our class because we're like, oh my God, we're like the forgotten class. Everyone's like, we're just going to pretend that never happened. So trying to figure out what options could exist. And so coming up with a class to really teach people about how to create their own law practice, manage your own law practice, operate from a business foundation. Now, obviously, the class has changed significantly over the years. We then moved on and we created an incubator, which was a joint incubator with BC Law and BU Law, which I worked with Jim on and from a creation. But I was so lucky that Emily took a chance on me and that Jim was willing, not in his job description, not something he's getting compensated for, but he agreed to literally come with me every day into the classroom. And this is not to be sacrilegious, so please don't take it that way. But I've often said, in my teaching career, WWJD, what would Jim do? Because being able to learn from him, and we have totally different teaching styles. He could write one word on the board and teach an entire class on that. I've got my PowerPoints and my music, and I'm Greek and Italian. I'm up there dancing. So I think it was probably a much more exciting class when it was the two of us and balance it out together. But lots of great experience with him in that.
Jeff mentioned getting involved in organizations or wherever your passions may lie. You have been a very involved lawyer. You've had a high role in the ABA. You were chair of the tech show. We talked a little bit about AI. Could you talk about what your role was there and kind of what you all showcased?
Yeah, so this is my immediate year of being done with Tech Show, which is a great place to be, right? Does everyone love being like past president? Like, oh, great, it went well, it's over, but it did take up the last 2 years of my life, so I'm grateful for the support from my family. Chairing ABA Tech Show, and before that, the ABA LTRC, especially coming off the 2020 commission, where the ABA all of a sudden started recognizing, oh, technology exists. We have a thing called email, not just a fax machine. Novel things to be discussing in the law at 2020. Now AI comes on the scene, and that's something that we really focus on in our class. It's interesting if people are following the news right now with the lawsuit that's being brought by the student in their school applying it. And I've told my students, I said, listen, I have tools and technologies. I will know. I've never had to give anyone an academic dishonesty complaint. Please don't make it be over AI. Their final deliverable is a business plan. Do not use AI to write your business plan. Now, I don't have a problem with it for research because it's a tool. It exists. It's something we as lawyers need to adopt. It is not replacing us, but it is so supportive and beneficial. And guess what? Our clients know. They know that it exists. So if you deny AI and all of a sudden your bill's coming out at 15 hours for, I hate to break it to you, something that now takes 15 seconds to do. We just have to really change. We have a huge value add as lawyers and as real people being the lawyers behind it, but it's really going to have a big effect kind of changing what it looks like. So very involved with the ABA from that, kind of taking a year off, but I'm grateful because the only thing that I have not stopped doing is the Women in the Law group with Northeastern, which people always ask. Yeah, we've got a number of the people in here. I had the privilege of chairing in this room, I think we were, the Women in the Law conference one year, and then getting involved afterwards of being part of this group of women who, it could be a birth, it could be a death of a parent, or it could be a true sponsorship. I, as a sole practitioner, don't have an entire marketing team behind us. And I always wonder, I'm like, how does everyone get nominated for all these awards? I wanted to be recognized by Mass Lawyers Weekly Excellence. And this group of women all got together and wrote a letter on my behalf. And it's a pretty impressive group of women, I've got to say. And guess what? Lo and behold, I got that. And then another recognition. And just a really great group across different graduation years of women who really lift one another up. And as I have, I've got 2 small children, a spouse who thankfully is here supporting me today. But that changes priorities, right? Whether you want to change priorities or not, they come, and guess what? They're very needy and demanding. Unbelievable. They're this small, and they already can tell you what they want. And so I was really grateful to have had all these experiences prior to having kids. And then I have stayed just right now with Women in the Law because it is really the most important thing to me from an organization. And Miel holds it together. I don't think anyone understands. I don't even know all this stuff that she does behind the scenes, but talk about like outside of job descriptions. I mean, she does everything for this law school, getting everyone here, connecting. I tell my students, which is really, they're not alumni yet. I'm like, oh, Miel will know someone who's in that area. Miel can help you. I'm sorry. Miel knows. If anyone has a question about Northeastern, I'm like, don't worry, I'll just ask Miel. And I'm just sitting there texting her like, oh, quick question. So thank you for everything you do in keeping that group together.
Thank you for the many ways that you're involved with Northeastern and the legal community beyond the Brown Forum, which is named after Judy Brown, and who started that program, co-founded that with me. One last question for you, Sophia. Do you have a life philosophy or a mission statement that you live by? Tell us.
So I think it's critical to define your own success and happiness and to create a strategic plan to work toward those goals. Everyone has a different definition of success, and when we're working towards what other people have set as these goals, it's really easy to get caught up in it. It's really important to live in the moment. If we're living in the past, there's nothing we can do. We can't change the past. If we're living for tomorrow, today is yesterday's tomorrow. And so we're all right here. It's a great time for us all to enjoy our time together. So live in the now, define your happiness, define your own success, and work towards that.
I'm still thinking about her statement. Tomorrow is yesterday's. I got a little bit.
I do often mess up. Do well to do good. I'm like, wait, did I get that one right? But I think I got that one right.
Well, thank you for being here today. Does anyone have any questions for Sophia? Any 09s?
Oh, this is like when I let class out.
There we go.
I represent small businesses and startups and transactional matters, so nothing litigation based. Let me know if you're litigators, happy to send work your way. So anything formation financing, licensing contracts, and growth restructuring.
Other questions? I see one.
For people who might be interested in starting their own firm and didn't take your class, do you have recommendations of places or resources to learn the skills of law practice management?
Absolutely. So first of all, email me. You can have access to my entire, course materials. So happy to share that with you. We're lucky in Massachusetts. There's an organization called Mass LOMAP, the Law Office Management Assistance Program, completely free. They will provide you mentorship. They will give you classes. If you just go to their website, you will be busy for the next year. There is a book through MCLE. I think Mike Sams might be the primary author, who's also an alumni, but it's Hang Your Own Shingle. By the way, I hate the term hang your shingle because it is just so simplified of what it means to run a business. I like the idea of building a house, but the book is called Hang Your Own Shingle, which if you just wanted to be directed to one book, If you have the MCLE online subscription, that's a great thing that you can download. They've got different articles, but HYOS is a good one. But please feel free. I've got cards I'm happy to give you. Email me. I'll give you any resources. More reading materials than you'll ever want.
Anybody else? Thank you so much, Sophia, and thank you all for being here today.